most of the surveys that I've seen and we've seen as a business, the independent garage tends to has a high retention rate of their customers. But that's, of course, as long as they've got the capabilities to service those vehicles then when the customer changes their vehicle. So you've kind of got a customer base that runs the significant risk of depleting over time, especially if that technology of those vehicles now being purchased is shifting and they don't shift with it. And they also don't demonstrate to those previous customers or those legacy customers that they still have the capabilities to now service the new vehicle. So I think marketing, communication, digital brand, digital visibility is critical for the independent garage, because not only have you got to try and engage and, I suppose, remind your existing customer base what you're capable of, you're going to have to continue to shout about your new capabilities and your invested capabilities to bring in new customer base as well. I think it's just as important around the back office capabilities of the independent garage, the way that they are managing their business, the way that they're managing their diaries, their utilisation, but then also the customer contact and looking after the customers, the follow-ups, as you said, how do they stay in touch with, how do they engage with the customers, and how digitally ready are they as businesses for tomorrow's consumer? Which we've seen in the last 2 years has dramatically shifted. The one area from a transportation point of view that's well over pre-pandemic is the LCV market, because of the amount of digital acceptance we've seen in the country from all sectors. And that's going to be all consumers that drive vehicles as well. Their attitude towards digital has shifted in the last 2 years. Sometimes it's hard to kind of prove or quantify, but we've seen the mileage travelled for LCV in the UK is 110% of what it was pre-pandemic, whereas general motor mileage is actually down around 8 to 10%. So it's a complete shift. And when you see the amount of, I suppose, digital shift especially in retail, but in consumer-led industries, I don't think we'll come back from that. I think that's something that the pandemic has brought in. Now, when you take that down into each industry, what does that mean for the independent garage? Your customer base has had a digital acceleration in their attitude, in their purchasing, in their inquisitiveness and their investigations. And have we as an industry kept up with that shift over the last 2 years? An interesting challenge. If we'd obviously been part of a European group, you have the privilege and the benefit of being able to compare markets and other markets in Europe. It's fair to say that the UK, we probably have a higher proportion of garages per geographical area than most other major European markets. And therefore that competitive intensity tends to come through in the way that those garages then have to operate. There's less cars for them to be fighting amongst themselves and consumers and customers, and therefore there's this kind of immediate intensity of trying to respond to the customer's request, being able to get that vehicle in, being able to get the parts and get the job out, everything being done as soon as possible. And we see that quite often. We can see a number of workshops within a geographical area all call for the same vehicle because we see the registration plate. So you've got consumers kind of price checking against different garages, and there's that real intensity. Where you've got markets where there's a lot more vehicles and less workshops, they have no choice but to plan more in advance, which means they tend to have more digital investment and maturity because they're planning that much further out. Size has an influence. So the bigger workshops and the kind of much larger workshop customers, because they've got more capacity, it tends to mean that they plan more in advance, which means they tend to adopt more digital capabilities that go with it. So we do tend, it's not always, but we do tend to see that the bigger workshop facilities that have a higher level of capability and capacity tend to then adopt the garage management systems, the online ordering, etc., because they have to, because they're planning and they've got volume coming through. And we see that in the body shops arena as well. So the body shops, because of the key-to-key time on repairing that vehicle is much longer, they tend to have more digital maturity and digital capabilities. Even if the overall vehicle numbers versus the garages or the number of potential customers per garage doesn't really change per se, the consumer's way of shopping is changing, which is obviously what you're alluding to. So even if the overall volumes don't shift, I think the demand from the consumer we know in the automotive 75% of all inquiries are done online first. So everyone is already, well, 3/4 of people are already searching before they make that call or before they enter or before they do something online and confirm that order. So it is absolutely changing, and I think the workshops that embrace that digital visibility, that are physically capable online, that can take inquiries, that can take orders online and bookings online, those are the workshops that ultimately will probably gain customer volume during these times. It's a slight sidestep, but the MOT situation in the last 20 months has been fascinating because that shunt of that 6-month referral volume, when you've got a typical workshop, we go back to that point that says the workshop has 2.5, 3 technicians, you've got a maximum capacity per day that you can do. And so if all of a sudden you've got part of the year that's got a massive deficit in requirement, and then you've got another part of the year that's got a much higher requirement, they can't change their capacity if they've got one ramp and one MOT tester, which means they run the risk of losing customers during that time. And what we've seen is the multi-site and the larger operators have benefited during that MOT period. And it's kind of almost an example of what the risks are with digital. The ones that can invest, the ones that are digitally visible, the ones that can handle inquiries online will be those ones that pick up those new customers or those inquiring customers. It's fascinating when you look at the independent workshops. We've got so from an LKQ Europe perspective, we introduced, it's been in pilot form so that we've been working with a group of workshops in the UK for the last 12 months, which is now planning to roll out more significantly next year. We've got an LKQ backed and owned garage management system. Like everything, when you've got solutions, the adoption rate, it really depends on the relationship between the branch, the team and the customer to really get to understand how that systems work. But where we've seen high adoption levels of the Carter's garage management system, and the customers really start to understand how they can utilize it, the efficiencies, the productivity, the pain, the hassle that's taken out of manual intervention over the phone conversations actually makes their life far more efficient, far easier. We see all the different metrics around errors, miscommunication, returns rates, all those things dramatically improve with that adoption where you are utilizing that connected tool between the two organizations. So I think for the independent workshop, using garage management systems, especially ones where they have the capability to be able to take that whole kind of digital preparation, that digital step. So with the CarSys platform, having that ability to be able to take online bookings straight into the system, having that ability to be able to communicate to the customer digitally, either by email, by text, etc. But just joining those dots, as well as then how that system and that workshop is working with its supplier, if you can make that whole process seamless, it takes a lot of wasted energy and cost out of that process. The level of investment and I suppose the physical space, the constraints of the premise that they're operating in, that's going to be probably the question that each of those independent garages need to think about. I think what's true and what's probably proven is that the better customer experience you can give within that workshop, the better. Obviously MOT lanes need to have visibility so the consumer can see their car being worked on. How much can you take that and take it beyond its kind of that conventional piece of work to all bits of work? So how do you engage the consumer in the work that you're doing on the vehicle? There are video solutions that are being adopted across the industry, where workshops are taking live videos of both inspections and work on the vehicle, and actually the customer engagement in that environment's very successful, and I think it creates that level of trust and transparency as to what the workshop sees and what's going on in their vehicle. So not only digital tools and transparency, visibility of what's happening around their vehicle, but then also around when they're in that workshop, what's the experience for them? Can they sit down? Can they relax? Do they need to wait? Are they dropping off? What's the convenience piece? So I don't think it's an absolute mandate for every single workshop to say that you need a dealership type experience. The more you can do to make it a pleasurable experience, the better. The more that you can provide some levels of facilities, if they are waiting around, that there's technology support and there's somewhere for them to be, then great. I think it's a combination of that physical experience inside the workshop and inside that customer reception, as well as actually how do you make that whole experience of the physical work on the vehicle as transparent as possible. So the digital tools, the videoing, other bits and pieces, as well as the physical insight experience, I think will help. And you make that more enjoyable, and you create that complete transparent experience. I think the better for the garage and for the consumer. The independent always outscore the OEM from a customer, both loyalty and trust on the work, but it's not 100%. And with the technology of the vehicles getting harder and harder, that question, that ambiguity, or that understanding of what you have and haven't done on the vehicle when it's a much more complex vehicle, I think the more that the garages really think about how they take their customer through that experience, how they demonstrate what they have and haven't done, what they see on the vehicle, what's happening, if you can build that trust and loyalty, I think that will pay dividends with that customer engagement, and they will stay with that garage.